Well, we're always just a little bit late. No, actually, we're a lot late this month because our guy, AstroLogic, we will not call him Al. Don't call him Al. Call him, we already have an Al. That's Al Dog. So this is
That's right.
reborn AstroLogic. I'll just call him maybe Astro for short.
There you go.
But anyway, welcome back to the show. And you are now a three-time winner in the game of life. Your third child has just entered the realm, and it just happens to be the same sign as the sign that we're talking about today, Leo. So congratulations,
Boom.
and any like first
Yeah.
hits, first takes,
Initial
right on
initial
little
thoughts.
Leo
Yeah.
baby. Yeah,
Yeah. So, well, we're officially a week old today. So actually, 1:31 p.m. my time will be officially like mark the official 1 week mark for her. I so she's I mean, still obviously still so young. There's so much more to learn about her and all that good stuff. But a couple things do kind of stand out to me. One, and I'll just take a an interesting approach, like a backdoor approach here. But my Cancer daughter is like taking to being a big sister. Like in that she's such a nurturer and has already, like, you can just tell like she was born for this, right? So on that side of things, like she's, we've got that support, and her Cancer nature is really coming through in a pinch hit here. um as for the baby herself, she is, I think for the by and large, she's actually pretty chill. She's not, I mean, thankfully, like knock on wood, she's, for the most part, a pretty good sleeper. What I will say about her is that she needs to be, and I would say what signals a true Leo fashion is like she needs to have like constant attention. So even when she's sleeping, she likes being nuzzled and like in close. And if she feels like she's been left in her crib or something like that while we go try and get some stuff done around the house, she'll kind of notice that quick, relatively quickly, and start signaling like, hey, where are you guys at? I'm meant to have that personalized attention here, that is my, my preference. So I would say that's probably the biggest, thing I've noticed. She's very much, I mean, I think probably all babies are like this, really, but it's just funny to, like, when she's, when I'm holding her, she just like kind of expects to turn and have access to her food source, like where's it at, and just that on demand, like where I'm hungry now, and I'm ready for food now, and just kind of like turning and seeking and searching. And I think
well,
uh
they have devices for you like that now. So
yeah, yeah, no, they
yeah.
don't. Not for me. God, that's so disturbing. Yeah. So, anyways, I think in a lot of ways she's just a regular newborn baby. But she definitely, likes to have her close, her people close to her, and she likes to know that people are close and ready to give her the things she needs. So.
Cool. Did she take a bow when she popped in?
I mean, she can't, she, I'll put it this way. All the nurses were talking about how smooth of a birth it was, right? She came in, I mean, is the smoothest of all three of our kids in terms of like, just, from the time, my wife started feeling contractions to the time the baby came out, it was a matter of like 3 hours. And kind of was on her own schedule, wasn't trying to, like, the nurses kept trying to, like, suggest or signal like, oh, we've got some time, here, we'll come back, we'll check on you in about 45 minutes. And it's just like that baby had her own schedule, and even took the whole doctors and nurse team by storm. And apparently there was a couple of doors down. Thankfully we weren't disturbed by it, but there was another lady having a baby, and it was like the exact opposite of what our experience was like, where ours was pretty smooth and just like, two pushes and she was out, versus another scenario that was quite quite different and quite arduous. So
So there was a lot of drama going on with that Leo baby.
yeah, exactly. So I don't even, I mean, in some ways, it's like, make being a pain in the ass is, kind of, you might say, indicative, but also just being like, because like the nurses kept talking, like it was almost like we made their jobs a little easier, you know what I mean? And so she, in some ways, she was already an immediate celebrity. Just all the nurses coming on to their shift who weren't there when she was born were like, heard, oh, I heard she was, blah blah. So in that sense, she was kind of, hit the ground running in true Leo fashion. So
Did you figure out her rising sign?
so you know what? I didn't figure out her rising sign, but maybe that's something you can point me to a website that can help me calculate it. Because the one that I usually go with, they don't give you a birth chart for anybody under 6 years
Hmm.
of age.
Hmm.
So that's the AstroDN's Astro.com. They don't, if you try typing in a baby that's less than 6 years old, they won't, they say we don't do that. So
So here's what you do.
um
You ready? Here's what you do. You
yeah,
ready?
yeah. Tell me.
They have a couple of options.
Okay.
You pick event.
Event. Okay. Good call. All right. So I'll check that out. It was 1:31 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Yeah,
Probably
I'll check that out.
probably I'd say Cancer rising.
Okay.
Yeah. My son was born at 1:45 p.m. and
Oh,
he was Pacific and he
got
was
it.
a Cancer rising, right?
Okay.
And 28 degrees, so probably like deeper into Cancer. So baby might have a first house sun or a second house sun. This is a really good jumping off point to talk about the difference between the rising sign and the sun sign
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a chart for a child. So, for those of you who are relatively new to astrology, in case you manage to stumble across this channel, the sun sign is derived from the day that you're born, right? So, if you were born on this day today, August 19th, you would be a Leo because you would be born between roughly July 23rd and August 22nd, which is usually the cutoff for Leo. Sometimes it will be July 22nd, depending upon this year we're in a leap year, so it's a little bit different, right? Um, the rising sign is based on the time that you're born, and it has to do with the sign and not the constellation. There are some people who get the two a bit confused. They're not the same, and I'm not going to go into all the astromath and why we go with sign versus constellation. This is Placidus astrology, and this was sorted out a long time ago by Ptolemy. So the rising sign comes in at the time that you're born, and then it defines the characteristic development of the individual up until roughly a certain age. And that age is really determined by Saturn uh transits, like the first
Mm-hmm.
Saturn square, the Saturn opposition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So we become engaged in our scan. Like, this is really important for children, for parents to know this about children. When children are young, they're tiny beings and they're in this gigantic world, and they have to navigate this gigantic world, and they have needs and wants and desires and all these things, fears that adults do, and sometimes they're amplified even more because they're tiny, and so they have to figure out a strategy in order to deal with the world. And so that strategy is enacted through the ascendant, and every ascendant has a different kind of strategy. So, for instance, we'll go with Leo rising since we're talking about Leo, which isn't always the same as Leo sun, by the
Mm-hmm.
way. So they share similar qualities, but they're not always the same. So a Leo rising child, right? What they're doing is they are evolving their personality through the sign of Leo. So what do we know about Leo? Leo likes to be on stage. They like praise. They like love. They like plaudits, right? They like applause. So they're going to evolve along those lines, right? So if they're creative or dramatic or precocious or funny, because Leos can be very funny as well, right? They'll get kudos.
Hmm.
They'll get rewarded for evolving along those lines. And so as a result of that, they say, "Oh, well, this works." Right? If I'm funny, outgoing, if I am dramatic, if I can be a big personality, make people laugh, stand out in some ways, right? That the immediate sphere will reward me, which
Hmm.
by and large, that'll be the case. So a good example of this is kids that would do plays like in their home for their
Hmm.
parents.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
like very Leo rising, right? Like they're going to perform for the, oh, look. Oh, isn't that adorable? She made the costume. Oh, look at that. And she got her little friends involved in the play as well, right? And so they get they get kudos for that. And like, oh, look at me. I'm really special. I'm really, really good at this, right? And that can be a very powerful and positive
Hmm.
reinforcement for self, right? Now, there's a downside to that as well, because if they do those things and nobody's paying attention, they will overcompensate for that. And so
Hmm.
you wind up getting like, you know, bigger behavior, more
Divas.
brassy, louder, right? Until somebody
Yeah.
finally notices, right?
Yeah.
And now we're in the realm of the drama queen.
Yeah.
Now, by and large, most parents are pretty good at managing that, and we'll say, "Oh yeah, well, you're really talented," or let's get you into drama camp, or
Yeah.
Little Miss Universe or whatever, right? Like, so that will happen. Maybe there's some musical lessons involved. Maybe there's ballet. There's all these creative outlets. These are for girls. For boys, it tends to revolve around sports
Uh-huh.
and being very good at sports, because Leo's really good at sports. It rules the fifth house. Now, here's what happens in a small universe. A Leo rising can be a very big entity, right?
Hmm.
And they can kind of you know um, charm their way or act their way, through a certain amount of time, right? Well, usually what happens with Leo rising children is that whether it's the girl who's like uber creative, the actress, the singer, whatever, or it's the guy who's the athlete, or he's the local rock star in the local rock band or whatever. When they leave home, they find out that there's a lot of other people like them in the
Hmm.
world,
Hmm.
and in
Hmm.
many ways they're even better than the world that propped them up to be this kind of big deal. And that can be a real crisis for a Leo rising individual. And then they have to get very real about who they are at that point.
Yeah.
And do they double down and say, okay, I'm going to outwork this person, which can be the case, right? But there's also some negative ego attributes, which is kind of reminds me of like Salieri and Mozart. Like Mozart was way better as a composer, but Salieri was way more maniacal and kind of Machiavellian, right? So
Hmm.
instead of being better than Mozart, he kind of plans Mozart's demise, right? So Mozart will wind up being a lesser perhaps figure, and Salieri will outlast him, right? So there
Yeah.
can also be some very Machiavellian things that can go on with Leo rising if they're not really, you know, ready, willing, and able to break down, right,
Yeah.
themselves. Also, the appearance of Leo rising isn't always the same as a Leo, although there will be some some crossover. We know that Leo's all about the hair, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Big hair, long hair. Like I last week on the start of the day, I did Danny Bonaducci, right? And
Okay.
he's a Leo. He was a child star. So what do you know about Danny Bonaducci? He's got this, big thing of red hair, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another part of the Leo persona, and it's not always hair. It can also be kind of a fashion. So they like to stand out. Like there's a lot of
Hmm.
color with Leo rising. You'll get some with Leo, but again, the ascendant will temper that Leo sun a little bit. So usually what
Yeah.
happens is that once the individual is okay in their skin with their rising sign, their sun sign begins to take over a bit more. So we can see late bloomers also
Yeah.
moving away from the ascendant and more into their sun sign. You're going to get some of those same attributes with the Leo sun. Like it's going to happen, but
Yeah.
it's just going to be a bit, let's say, different. Even somebody like
Yeah.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a Leo rising. What's he known for? He's known for his hair,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like he's got the hair thing. It's for better or worse. And he has a lot of the attributes of a Leo rising. Like of the Trump family, he was the one that stood out, right?
Hmm.
Wasn't his brother? His brother was the one that was the black sheep. It's Donald Trump, and as a result, he takes over ultimately from his father, Fred. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? And the thing that you get with Trump also is a sense of the dramatic, larger than life, huge, great. I mean, and he also really honors loyalty, especially the
Hmm.
loyalty to him, which is a very Leo kind of rising thing as well. And you'll get that with the Leo sun sign. So it's always interesting to like look at the sun sign and the rising sign and how the two
Yeah.
mix and match. Um, this is another interesting side note, and this has to do with the midheaven, which when you look at the chart, it's at the top and it says MC up there,
Hmm.
right? And that's where we are as we move into the world, right? Like at the world stage, the ascendant is you open the door, and that's who you are when you open
Hmm.
the door. The MC is like the world at large. So Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, is a Leo, and so he is Sun in Leo, and it's in his ninth house, kind of close to his midheaven, and his midheaven is in Leo. And I have seen this with people that have Leo midheavens. They do not like to perform. Chris Cornell was not into performing live. He always had a very challenging relationship with performing live. And yet at the same time, when he did, I mean, my God, I mean, the guy was just, he
Yeah.
was he was a mythic force, right?
Well, now, wouldn't that make him a Scorpio rising with Leo at the midheaven, or yeah, at the MC?
It would be Sag.
Sag. Okay. Okay.
Sag. Depending on the degree.
Hmm.
Depending on the degree. So I'm a late Scorpio rising. I
Hmm.
have Leo in my ninth house, and I'm
Okay.
a kind of an early Virgo on the midheaven. But
Okay.
but you'll see that with like people that have a Leo midheaven. Like if you have a child that has a Leo midheaven, they may not want the spotlight, but
Yeah.
invariably they will be pushed there. And,
Okay.
and when they're there, they'll do well. They will
Interesting.
they will do well, but it's not really where they really want to be.
Hmm.
So those are just some of the interesting kind of side lights and bullet points for Leo in some of those
Maybe
places.
you can touch on real quick because you said you guessed that maybe her rising sign for my daughter will be like a Cancer. Cancer in a lot of ways is an opposite, sort of temperament to Leo. How do those competing sort of forces manifest in your experience when you have somebody with a starkly different sun sign than their rising sign?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the brief tidbits that you shared about your
Yeah.
new daughter sounds very Cancer rising to me.
Uh-huh.
Like where's the breast, right? That's like
Yeah. Yeah.
Cancer rising, and the needy part, like, hey, where is everybody,
Hmm.
right? So, you know, if those needs are met, right? If those needs are met, and I know they will be, But if those needs are met, then what will happen is that the sun sign, which either would be late first or in the second house, because Leo follows Cancer, that's the area of the chart that would be predominant for your daughter. So the sun in the second house would be terra firma, grounded, right,
Mm-hmm.
connected to the earth. And so your daughter will need a lot of security, right,
Mm-hmm.
both from an emotional sense and from a material sense, right? So everything in her immediate environment, like, where she lives and dwells, ultimately should be like sunny and light and warm
Mm-hmm.
and playful. Security doesn't always mean like, you're never going to miss a meal.
Right.
You're always going to be swaddled and coddled, and right, it can mean many different things. So for her, being playful, allowing her to kind of open her heart, even at times test the boundaries of her material world, which
Mm-hmm.
Leo will do a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Also, I think animals would play a very big role in her life with the sun in the second house,
Mm-hmm.
and small animals initially. So yeah, I mean, the key with Cancer rising in general is the idea is that you give them enough nurturing when they're young, right? So they're not starving for it later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
That's really important. And then again, understanding sort of the cycles of being. That's a really, really important part of Cancer. The other thing with Leo rising is there's like false pride, and then there's what I would call, more positive, negative pride. We'll call it negative pride and positive pride. So
Mm-hmm.
negative pride would be egotistical,
Mm-hmm.
up, and it's like, look what I did, and it's a piece of shit, but everybody tells you it's great, right? And then taking and having a sense of arrogance about it. Positive pride, again, this is the self, right? This is all about the self. Positive pride is to carry yourself in a way that has respect, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that is really the lesson for Leo rising, to carry yourself with respect, to carry yourself with dignity, without being haughty, egotistical, or arrogant. And that's kind of the lesson of Leo in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Leo has this regal bearing about it. And, you have to kind of live up to it in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go on and on about this, but
Yeah.
those are the main attributes.
Yeah. No, that's good stuff, man. That's juicy.
Yeah. So I did put together some other attributes and some detriments for the sign itself. So let me bring these up here, and let me see if I can just grab it on my completely overcrowded desktop.
How many screens do you use?
I just use one screen, but
Okay.
I have like crazy tabs, and I've got all kinds of stuff on my desktop. All right, so here we go. Okay.
Boom. Yeah,
Here
that
we here
artwork,
we go.
man. That's awesome.
You know, I know, I'm sorry. AI is going to put some designers out of business. I hate to say it,
Yeah,
but
for sure. For sure.
for a schlub like me, I mean, you know, I'll take it. Okay, so you're Leo child. All right, July 23rd, August 22nd. Remember, Leo is ruled by the sun,
Hmm.
right? And August happens to be in the northern hemisphere, the peak of the sun, the sunniest
Yep.
time of the year, right? And we have that crazy Lions Gate, which we encountered on 8/8, 2024. So that's always going to be part of the lion's tail being born during this time. And Leos they're natural performers.
Hmm.
So whether it's um, a presidential performer like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, right? They're performers. or whether it's a musical performer. I just mentioned Chris Cornell. Of
Hmm.
course, the ultimate, uh, you got Madonna, whatever your thoughts are on Madonna, right? Like Madonna is a Leo and she comes across very much like a Leo. Madonna is really tiny too. She's only what, about 5'3" or something,
Oh, wow.
right? But everybody would think she was much bigger than that because of like her persona and how she carries herself. Tom Brady is a Leo, and of course, he's got to be at the top of the list, right? In terms of quarterbacks, like Tom Brady is the GOAT.
Yeah.
Barry Bonds is a Leo, right? So you have what many would consider the greatest football player of all time, Tom Brady, Leo, right? Barry Bonds, most home runs in a season,
Hmm.
most home runs all time
Yep.
with an asterisk. He's a Leo,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
By the
then,
way, quick side
yeah,
note, I just saw a really great video of Barry Bonds and Greg Maddux being showed footage of them facing off against each other, like, I don't know, 20 years ago,
yeah,
and they both remembered that exact sequence, and like they both had like almost identical, like just from competing sides of the equation, right? They just had almost identical like knowledge of the scenario and what was going on, and their analysis was impeccable. But it was such a fun kind of walk down memory lane. Anyways, Barry Bonds, I that asterisk, it's fine by me. I'm a
right,
fan.
right. And then
So
prior to Michael Jordan, let's say Michael Jordan has a knee injury and doesn't qualify for GOAT status.
yeah.
Um, Magic Johnson's in the conversation for
Hmm.
greatest player of all, one of the greatest players. He's a Leo, right? So you can see how Leos tend to matriculate to the top of their profession,
Hmm.
no matter what. That's just the nature of Leo, right? So if you have a Leo child, they need an arena to perform in. This is
Okay.
this is very important so that they can stand out, and they can be the sort of the solar the solar point of radiation, right? In their life. So
Hmm.
it's really important for a Leo child to have something where they can stand out and be good at. And it's usually something that they love, right? Because when we talk about Leo, we talk about the fifth house, which is Leo's house. And that's where you encounter passion, pastimes, play, all those things that we associate with the sign of Leo. So if you have a Leo child, find out what they love. They're going to be better at what they love than some external thing that they have to
Yeah.
discipline themselves towards, for sure. Like if, Tom Brady had no problem doing all those things, right, to stay in shape and do whatever he
Yeah.
did, the Alex Rodriguez thing or whatever, right? Um, his trainer. Is it Rodriguez or Guerrero? I forget which one it is. It's a guy named
Hmm.
Alex. Anyway,
Okay.
but he does it because he wants to be number one, the best,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is Leo, and he loves football, right? He loved it so much that he sacrificed his marriage for it, but that's a different story, right? So that's but if you told Tom Brady, hey, Tom, your goal, here's what you're going to do, Tom. You're going to go be a commercial real estate broker, right? Like he's got to have no investment in that
Yeah. Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
doesn't give him a stage, right? It gives him no stage. Now he's moved into broadcasting. I don't know how good he's going to be, but now he has another stage. And if we know Tom Brady, right, and the work ethic and the wanting to be the best at what he does, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, we'll be talking about Tom Brady as one of these guys who became really great at broadcasting.
Hmm.
So I mean, that's really, I think, the most important point to understand if you have a Leo child is to support the thing that they're passionate about.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you can do that and put up with it, and you have the resources, the money, and you can do that, then there's a better than average chance that they'll be successful at it.
Hmm.
The one thing that Leo also has to learn is they have to learn the lesson of heart. And Leo rules the heart, right? So in order to be good at something at a certain point in time, you have to be maybe not so good at it.
Hmm.
And you recognize your limit. Like again, we'll use Tom Brady as an example. When he went to the NFL Combine, the guy had a dad bod, and he ran like a goose. Um, and you looked at him and you said, "Oh fuck, 6th round pick, right?"
Yeah. Yeah.
That motivated him, right? He had to have the heart in order
Yeah.
to say, "I'm going to show you." Know, the first thing he said to Bob Kraft, the first thing he said out of his mouth, he said, "Mr. Kraft, I'm going to show you. One of these days, you're going to be happy you drafted me." Right? Like that's Tom Brady and the indomitable spirit of the heart. So if your Leo child somehow is not great at the thing it does first, push them a little bit,
Hmm.
right? And if they are good and then they meet some resistance at a higher level, push them a little bit more, or at least
Yeah.
give them the encouragement to hang in there. You go back to Tom Brady at Michigan, right? He had to share the quarterback job with that guy. Was his name Drew Hutchinson, right? And Drew Hutchinson was like a number
Who?
exactly, right? He was like a number one recruit,
Yeah.
and Drew Hutchinson had played baseball for the New York Yankees, and it didn't work out. So he actually went back to college and played quarterback. And Brady had to split his senior season with Drew Hutchinson. And of course, Drew Hutchinson went to the Cowboys and didn't really do anything. But again, that's Tom Brady. Like he's having to deal with this guy who comes in
Hmm.
and he ultimately has to prove he's better than him. And this is
Yeah.
one of the attributes of Leo. And it's a positive attribute. The negative attribute of Leo is when everything is given to them. And that's not good. When everything is given to them and they're like the golden child, when things do go wrong for them or go south for them, it is not good, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's when you'll see meltdowns, tantrums, identity crisis. So,
Hmm.
yeah, Leo's a very interesting sign, and one of the things about Leo, have you like besides your newborn, have you had any significant interactions with Leo people in your life?
Yeah, actually, I two immediately come to mind. Well, three, but the two that I had originally in mind are, I mean, they fit it to the T. So my mother-in-law is a Leo, and when you touched on earlier about not like the look what I can do pride, but like the how you carry yourself like in a regal fashion, that's like her, right? She just has such a dignity and inborn grace that is not like she doesn't try to do that, right? It exudes from her, right? And then another one is a college buddy of mine, actually a fraternity brother of mine, who I still remain good friends with. He's got young girls, and they're like my kids' age. Um, and he's just like one of those guys that you know he does expect it kind of to be all about him, like things just kind of work out for him. Like he finds himself in enviable situations, like seeming it's like, wait, what? We're when we're just like, shooting the breeze, like we're on an even footing, and then we go out into the world and like the world just like parts for him. It seems like. So yeah, I do I do have a couple of frames of reference there for that.
Well, they're the male version of Leo. They're very Apollonian.
Yeah,
They're like sun gods, right?
yeah, yeah,
And a lot of times they're treated accordingly.
yeah.
And I mean they're the type of guys who, if they play their cards right, right, everybody wants to be around them.
Hmm.
They're kind of in alpha territory. And yeah, like the world works.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
world works for them. So again, their biggest challenge is when that starts to break down a little bit, and then
Hmm.
they get to see kind of what they're made of, and then they have to find the heart and the courage to, carry on, keep going, and sort of, I wouldn't say expand, but incorporate, um, I would say some humility, right?
Hmm.
A little humility. A little humility goes a long way for a Leo. So self-deprecation is always a good thing to practice if you're a Leo. It keeps the plebes satisfied. Right? Um, so my father was Leo. I grew up with a Leo father, and well, he was a huge presence, like,
Yeah.
huge presence. And I've said this before. He one time he looked at me right in the eyes, and he said, "If you're going to hit the king, you have to kill the king." I'm like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
What are you saying here? Like, I know what you're saying. I get it, but like, really?
I feel like that's some like old school kind of values right there. Like you don't hear people thinking that way or talking that way much these days. It's that's a little throwback right there.
That's some mafia shit right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
That's funny.
the one thing that I noticed about him, but I could never really like capitalize on it. I tried, but I could never really capitalize on it. Was there is this gnawing sense of insecurity that Leos have,
Mm,
and for all of their grandeur and at times bluster, um, sometimes inside that Leo person is somebody who's very insecure, right?
hmm.
And it reminds me really of the Wizard of Oz, and the wizard to me is a manifestation of Leo, right? Like he's huge, he's big, he's the almighty Oz,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's terrible, he's omniscient, right? But then you pull back the curtain, he's this little tiny man, who's very insecure and kind of, has a bit of an identity crisis. So I think there's some of that to Leo as well. And a lot of times their quest for achievement is fueled by that, that sense that if they don't do these things, they're going to be less than. And
Hmm.
people might find out that maybe they're not as great as maybe they think they are on the inside.
Yeah,
So that's, yeah. And you can get to Leos. Well, like, it didn't really work for my father though. I
yeah,
tried. You can get to him through flattery.
yeah. Okay,
If
that
you
makes
want,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you want to just tell them how great they are, right?
Now, you touched on something about if they don't sort of fulfill this sense that they have of how they need to be perceived by others, then they feel less than. On a more meta or macro level here, like to what degree do you think, and maybe you've never even thought about this, but like, do you think as individuals we're kind of meant to be the expressions of our are we meant to overcome our astrology? Are we meant to fulfill our astrology? Are we like what's the best? What's the when you see people who are like in harmony and just they're aligned. Like what what relationship do they have with their astrology in your experience?
So with Leo, I mean, it's with every sign, right? Every
Yeah.
sign deals with its opposite sign. So
Uh-huh.
for Leo, it's Aquarius,
Uh-huh.
right? So what is Aquarius? Aquarius is a group, right?
Mm.
Aquarius
Mm-hmm.
is an audience. It's a room filled with people, right? So for somebody like Mick Jagger, he thrives in that Aquarian environment, right? With
Yeah.
all these people giving him adulation. Is he the same person off stage that he is on stage? That's really, I think, the acid test for Leo, right? Are they the same person without the adulation?
Mm-hmm.
That if they can be, right? If they can be, then they're good. They're good. If their internal light can shine without any kind of theoretical feedback and or what's the word I'm looking for? Um Attribution or love, right? Then I think they pass the test. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's the same for every sign, right? Every sign's test, I think, is in the sign that is opposite it, right? So it's like, you're an Aries.
Mm-hmm.
So can you be an Aries in a relationship, right? Because you're self-directed, you're self-guided, you're gonna act, right? But
Yeah.
in a relationship, you can't do that all the time,
Yeah.
right?
They incorporate that Libra, that balance, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for Leo, also on a grander scale, they have to incorporate the other,
Mm-hmm.
and not, and if you are somebody who is very leonine, right? That you don't treat people like shit, right? Which again, Aquarius, sort of the group, like
Mm-hmm.
everybody's the same. They're all just a prop for, your rise to the top or whatever, right? So that
Yeah.
opposite sign is so critical for your own sun sign. That's the thing that you have to figure out and you have to incorporate. So I'm a Virgo, right? And if I wanted to, I could just be super hypercritical of everybody. But I have Pisces, which is my opposite sign, which says, hey, maybe there's some latitude here, right? Maybe there's some
Yeah.
compassion and empathy and forgiveness. So not everybody's going to live up to your own standard. Maybe you're not even going to live up to your own standard, right? So I think does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely gets to it. And I, I think it's one of those questions that could probably contain an entire episode, right? So we don't need to bang on the drum too much, but it's an interesting idea of like, making the most, you know, like it kind of feeds into questions I have about karma and like all kinds of things too. So we don't need to go there, but yeah, it's a fascinating question for sure. And you definitely gave a nice lead into it for sure.
Okay. So let's just cruise through these things really
Yeah.
quickly. We talked about Leo rising, right? There's also the Leo sun. And if your child or you happen to have your son in the fifth house, which is Leo's house, you're here to learn through that prism of the fifth house. So there's
Mm,
a number of different ways that you can experience Leo in your chart, right? So right now we're just talking about the sun sign and some of the attributes. And again, July 23rd through August 22nd. Right at the top, playful Leos enjoy play. Whether it's sports, whether it's games, board games, video games, they learn through play. So that's
mm,
very, very important. And it's not just like life skills, it's also the interactivity with others through play.
hmm
And usually what will happen is that they will figure out that they're, good at something, and they will gravitate towards that thing so they can begin to establish a natural hierarchy with the thing that they're good at. Right. So the playfulness of the Leos really, really important. By and large, they tend to be very outgoing. Um, I just mentioned the Chris Cornell piece, right? He might be a late Scorpio rising if I
Mm,
he so you might see Chris Cornell through that kind of dark lens, right?
hmm
Because his sun is in Leo when it's in the ninth house. But would you consider Chris Cornell outgoing? Most people would probably say not. Until you got to
right.
know him, he'd be really, really nice, right? Really pleasant, fine. But by and large, Leos are outgoing. They're a sign that is extroverted. You can almost see this in astrology, right? You'll have maybe an extroverted sign with Aries, perhaps more introverted with Taurus, extroverted with Gemini, introverted with Cancer, extroverted with Leo, more introverted with Virgo, more extroverted with Libra, introverted with Scorpio, more extroverted. I mean, do you see that they kind of like
Yep. Yep.
feed off of each other? So Leo's going to be more extroverted and outgoing. They're colorful. They're colorful characters. Although at a certain point, I would see Tom Brady's not always a good gauge for Leos because he has a Sun Saturn conjunction in his chart, which is one of
Mm,
the reasons why he works so hard. At a
yeah.
certain point in time, I wouldn't have called Tom Brady colorful at all. But as he gets older, there's probably a very good chance he will be a lot more colorful because of that sun. But
What
go ahead.
what about style? What about stylish? I mean, I know he's kind of like a big fashion guy, right?
He's a Libra rising. So that's going to
Okay.
define his aesthetics and his values.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Libra rising always kind of looks good, right?
Yeah.
The clothes fit. He's never going to wear anything over the top,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That goes with Libra rising. But Leo rising and Leos in general, sometimes they'll put something together. You go, "Ooh,
yeah.
that's a statement."
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, so yeah, style wise, they can be very colorful, particularly with the hair.
Uh,
The hair thing is pretty, pretty dominant with Leos. And like you get a lot of that big hair in the 80s.
I literally just about to ask that, especially with like what the so-called butt rock, right? I mean, that had a very Leo, kind of vibe to it, right? The spandex suits, the big crazy hair, the makeup, all kinds of stuff like that.
Right. So you got that with, the all those guys they're starting to come online, what, in the late 80s, that kind of uh, glam metal stuff, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
Poison and all those bands.
yep, yep.
That's very Leo. Like that's very Leo like, and they're trying to stand out. I think the attribute. I'm just trying to figure out when like Vince Neil and all those guys are born. They're a little bit younger than me.
Uh,
Axl Rose is born in 1964, right?
oh,
And
okay.
so Guns N' Roses, I would say that when you get around like 1965, 66, they're kind of at the beginning of Gen X.
Hmm.
And then those Gen X kids have boomer parents, and they tend to be very leonine in their expression. And I'm just trying to figure out okay, so if you look at the 1960s and you look at like the psychedelic movement, the summer of love, that is a really good representation of Leo because they are
Mm,
boomers and they're born
hmm
with
hmm
Pluto and Leo. So they got really long hair, right? Like lion's mane, stuff like that. And I think that plays a pretty significant role in that representation, especially with the men,
hmm
although you'll get it with the women too. Also, the afro becomes really big in the 60s,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And the afro is sort of the black expression or the Afro-American expression of long hair,
Yep.
right?
That's right.
It's a different version, but it's still big. And so Pluto and Leo, known for their hair. I think the 80s, like the late 80s or early 90s, it's a very interesting time. I think the styles for women in the 80s are maybe coming off their boomer mothers. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe their boomer moms are real estate agents and they've got all this big hair,
Yeah.
right? The ones that you'd see on the
Yeah. Oh, the
on the
shoulder
on
pads.
yeah, on the
Oh,
benches and
yes.
shit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
There's still a few of those out there today, man. I feel like that's an archetype that goes on through the ages. They just,
right, exactly, exactly.
yeah.
So colorful is a word that we would use for Leo. By and large, they're pretty adventurous. Although they do like people to join them on their adventures,
Hmm.
right? They're not like Aries, which Aries will, cut through the woods, and pioneer some shit, right? Like, walk the Appalachian Trail.
Hmm.
Leo needs a band of merry men to go along with them on their adventure, right? So they're adventurous, but they don't want to do it alone. They need a band,
Hmm.
right? Like Mick Jagger, maybe one good solo album. She's the boss. He's much better with a band than solo Mick Jagger. I think we can all agree,
Hmm.
right? If I'm not mistaken, Robert Plant is also a Leo, right? I'm pretty sure he's a
Okay.
Leo, right? So he's got the big hair, the big mane. He had a pretty good solo career though, unlike Jagger. They're creative.
Yeah.
Leos are creative. They are. They're creative people. Two most creative signs, I believe, are Pisces and Leo. They're the most
Uh,
they're the most creative. Naturally creative. Other signs are creative, but in different ways. And so they're creative in terms of their self-expression. They're creative in terms of maybe their art or whatever it is they're doing. The sun is a generative principle in their lives. So they tend to be creative. And if you have a Leo child, figure out what they like: pens, markers, paints, whatever, right? Let
mhm.
them indulge in their creativity. Um, Tend to be loving. The Leo child can be a very loving child, right? And they'll get, I love you, mama. I love you, dad. They're good at that. They're not, unless they have a very difficult ascendant, they're usually pretty
Mhm.
good at expressing their love. So, and even for, pets, there's a really interesting connection with pets and Leos, as well. Um, Loyal, they can be very loyal, but they also demand loyalty, hence Donald Trump, right? He'll be loyal to people, but you better be loyal back. If not,
Mhm.
hit the road, Jack, right? So they are loyal, but they demand it. Royal is another word. It rhymes with loyal. We talked about sort of the royal persona.
Mhm.
The little king, the little queen, the little emperor, the little empress. You'll see this with Leos. And like your mother-in-law, she'll carry herself in a, even my father
Yeah.
was a working class dude and he carried himself in a really dignified fashion,
Yeah.
right? So that's one of the attributes of being a Leo. They're sporty, right? Sporty means they like sports. And they also like things like gambling. Leos will gamble. Remember, the fifth house rules pastimes. So it's not
Mhm.
just basketball or baseball, but also things like billiards. Like Leos like to bet on things, right? They're good at wagering, and they love it. They love a good gamble, right? So they're sporty. You'll see the precociousness, which I talked about. They'll kind of be little adults, right?
Mhm.
And there's a good side and a plus side to that, and there's a downside to that, right? Hey, you got plenty of time to grow up, right? Spend some time being a kid. And you have a Gen A, Leo. So these Gen A kids are, man, they get there fast, right? They
Yeah.
get there real
Yeah.
fast. Yeah. So it's almost like they're on an accelerator program. Um, Dramatic, both positive and negative, right? They can be dramatic in their self-expression, and when they don't get what they want, that's the kind of drama you don't want to have. Fun loving, playful, adventurous. They love to have fun. Leos can be pranksters. Remember that. They can be pranksters. What's interesting is that when you look at the Chinese system in the Chinese zodiac, Leo's ruled by the monkey, right? Leo's monkey in the Chinese system, and we know that
Okay.
the monkey is a trickster. Leo enjoys pranks. They will play pranks on you, and they will sit back and laugh. But dare you play a prank on a Leo? Be careful. Be careful about that. But they're fun loving. They enjoy a good time. And then they stand out. They just naturally stand out, right? They have that quality about them, which is a positive, and sometimes it can be a real negative. Anything you want to say about any of those things before we move on to the detriments?
No, I mean, Leo's a good sign, man. Those are some pretty positive attributes, I would say. And I'm excited to jump in here to the shadow side of Leo.
Uh, so a couple of years ago, I did this thing where I ranked astrological signs. I should
Yeah,
I should find those videos and put them back up and do a new thumbnail for it. That would be interesting.
that
Uh,
would be a great series. I'd tune into that for sure.
I did it. I did what I thought was the best astrological signs, uh, and I started with the worst to the best, and then the best of the worst, and then I did the same thing with rising signs. I concluded that of the astrological signs, all 12, Leo was the best. If I
I
had to
mean,
if I had to be born under a sign, it'd be this sign.
hard to argue that. I got to say. I mean, based on some of the stuff we've covered here, I mean, they definitely have a nice life path, that they get to partake in. So I don't know. I would agree with that.
I did not have it as the best rising sign though,
Okay.
because
What was that?
I believe they were close 1, 2. It was I forget which one was first. It was either Taurus or Libra,
Okay.
and I thought both of those rising signs were, and probably of the two, I think I may have picked Libra rising, but
Hmm.
very close, both ruled by Venus. And the reason why I didn't have Leo rising this high is because of the nature of Aquarius in the seventh house, which
Mm.
makes partnerships difficult and unusual, right? And for all the passion that Leo rising can bring, um, Aquarius tends to be much more based on platonic
Mm.
relationships and friendships, and they can be cool and unusual, and so it while on the surface you get a lot of the attributes of Leo rising, there's a whole other reality in that seventh house.
Yeah.
um so anyway, I think it's the best sun sign. So all you Leos out there, pat yourselves on the back, give your kid a hug, tell him you love them. They're the best at everything, no matter what they do. Um,
Very, very fitting, actually, that they would have to be sort of given the title of best astro sign too, right?
well,
Uh,
yeah. Although Quincy Jones wouldn't agree with me. Quincy Jones says Pisces is the best sign.
oh, he's got a strong opinion on that, does he?
Well, he happens to be a Pisces, and I
Okay.
think, look, I think one could make a case, a strong case, that uh, Pisces could be a very highly rated sign if they know who they are,
Mm-hmm.
because of the amount of creativity that a Pisces has, which I think is profound. But we'll save that for Pisces when we get there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
all right, let's get into the detriments. The big E, egotistical. All right, Leo and ego, they kind of sound a little bit alike, right? So they will get kind of at times hung up on things like, God forbid, they lose to somebody who they think they can beat hands down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Whoa, that that
yeah.
will that will not go over well, right? Now, it may force them to reevaluate what they're doing and get better, right? Which isn't always a bad thing. But the downside is like the Leo actor who is constantly checking the reviews of their
Hmm.
work. Like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
like Robert De Niro is a Leo, and you just know that like that guy's got a huge ego, right? Huge ego, and yeah, how he's perceived, I think, is very important to him.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure he's
Well,
learned that lesson yet.
I don't know if the character that I'm about to mention here is a Leo or has anything to do with Leo, but the phenomenon you just described reminds me of Sam Harris and how Sam Harris has, always fancied himself the smartest guy in any room that he's ever in. And when Trump and then COVID and then certain, of the most recent phenomena have proved him to be like he got it wrong. He's a quintessential example of somebody who can't. He just has to double down until he's alone by himself in the corner, because he can never acknowledge that people he think are his lessers could get something right that he got wrong. So, anyways, yeah, I,
So Sam
yeah.
Harris is an Aries.
Oh, okay,
He's
okay,
an Aries. Um, One of the things that's interesting about Sam Harris, but to your point, Aries don't like to get things wrong.
yeah, yeah,
They don't. It's like they're not going to go out of the way to correct themselves and say, I blew it, I fucked up, I'm sorry. Right?
yeah.
That's not in the Aries portfolio. Sam Harris is a Hollywood kid,
Uh
and
huh.
I believe his mother was a TV producer, right? So even though he's not a Leo, I think he got some of the radiant exposure from his
Yeah.
mother in Hollywood. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a good. I mean, I that was a really good question. Fire sign attached to their POV,
Hmm.
right? A Leo would have sued him, right? Like that's what Trump would do. Even though
Yeah.
he's not a Leo rising. They can be arrogant. Leos can be arrogant people, even on the ascendant, perhaps even more so with the ascendant, right? Like at times their shit doesn't stink.
Hmm.
And it can be a false arrogance. And they have to learn. Like Barry Bonds was arrogant. You look up arrogant, you will see Barry Bonds in the dictionary. And I'll never forget when he was signed with the Giants. He walked into the locker room, and there are all these. This is probably spring training, right? And he finds the pitchers on the team, and he says, "I got you, I got you, I got you." Meaning, like I hit one out on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's Barry Bonds day one, okay, and he's just getting started, right? So there's an arrogance that Leos will carry with them, and I would say that you could even apply that with to Barack Obama. There's kind of an
Yeah.
arrogant vibe with Barack
Yeah.
Obama. You know, like pick whatever place you want him to be born. The guy has
Right.
a Leo vibe about him, right? You'll see this, and a well-adjusted Leo will temper that a little bit, right?
Hmm.
They'll temper it, but they'll always have that line that it's an invisible line. You don't always want to cross it because you'll catch fire with it.
Yeah.
Um, so they can also be very selfish, like
Yeah.
me, mine, me, mine. Right? If somebody else is getting more attention than they are, they'll do something. Right? They will do something to redirect the attention, the energy to them, and it can be positive. It's not always positive, right?
Hmm.
So, God forbid you have somebody in your family who outshines your Leo child, right? Because now you got a like a bit of a blood feud on your hands, right? God forbid you have a very powerful and kind of scheming and undermining Scorpios. I'm going to get that, Leo. I'm going to get that.
Yeah.
Oh, they think they're real big, right? So, yeah. So once they once they stop getting the juice, they need the juice back. So that's when the selfish part comes in. Or if they're just like overly indulged when they're young,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? They just automatically assume that they're going to get that. And when they don't get that, that's when they become selfish, right? And so they realize the universe isn't spinning around them.
Yeah.
Um, Again, Tom Brady aside, Sun Saturn conjunction, they can be lazy. It can be a lazy sign, like your buddy, like the Red Sea parts
Hmm.
to them, things come to them. Apollo, they don't have to work hard. They're
Yeah.
hoisted upon the shoulders of their fraternity or their teammates or whatever, right? I think it gets harder for them um as they get older
Hmm.
because that vibrancy, that quality of youth, begins to fade. And that's, when they hit that Saturn opposition at 44, I think it hits Leo's the hardest because
Yeah.
they have to kind of flip their script. Tom Brady couldn't do it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He
Great
couldn't
point.
do it. He had an agreement with Giselle, right? Like he won the Super Bowl. He got to the top of the mountain, and he just had to have one more taste, right? One more taste. And that Saturn opposition at 44 says, you got to do something different with your life. That was probably the worst season in Tom
Yeah.
Brady's pro football career,
Yeah.
right? The team sucks. He sucks. Giselle leaves him. It's like, well, he's going around with all these, young supermodels, but is he really happy? I don't know. I don't know. I can't answer.
Well,
So,
plus Giselle was his little bruja, right?
yeah.
She
Oh,
used to,
yeah. That's right. She used to take care of business for Tom on the elemental side of things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Leos can be judgmental as well. Like again, that gets into the sort of arrogant, their shit doesn't stink territory, right? Like they're at a level that other people aren't, even though they may not be, right, in their heads,
Yeah.
right? Like I bet you run into some hillbilly Leos, who are the king of the trailer park. You know what I mean? And there's some hierarchies going on there, right? Like, oh, like Cleon just don't have that swag we got over here, baby. I love the swag we got going
Juggalos.
on. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So they can be judgmental. Because the other side of that is they have a fear of being judged. Like that's the other
Yeah.
side with Leo. They don't like it. They can be manipulative, right? We hope that they aren't, but they like every sign has the potential to be manipulative,
Hmm.
but Leo can play that manipulative game.
Hmm.
Oh, I may not be the most popular person. I'm going to buy some votes, right? So there you go. Like, high school election, I'll buy votes. You
Yeah.
know, I'll promise these things to these people, and that's where the manipulation can come into play.
So,
it-
so would you say for a Leo that like being viewed as the winner is more important for their ego than actually being the winner?
I think it's
Does that
both.
make sense?
I
Yeah,
think
both.
they
Okay.
really want to be the winner. Um, Here, I'll give you another example. Perfect example. Deion Sanders.
Oh yeah.
Deion Sanders, wants to he wants to win.
Hmm.
Did when the Falcons weren't winning, Deion says, I'm up out of here. Right? Where does he sign? He signs with the 49ers,
Yeah.
wins the Super Bowl. Does he take more money to go play for, oh, I don't know, the Jacksonville Jaguars? No, he goes to the Dallas Cowboys.
Right.
Deion wants to win, right? And every team after that, with the exception, I think, of maybe Washington. I think Washington was a paycheck for him.
Hmm.
But look at him now at Colorado. They're not winning, but tell that to Deion.
Yeah.
They haven't played a game and they're in
Yeah.
first place already, right?
Yeah.
And oh, by
Yeah.
the way, you cross him with that. Have you seen some of those press conferences?
I've caught like clips and glimpses of it, but I mean, I don't think I've had the full dose.
I'm not speaking to you. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not. Who do you work for? CBS. I'm not speaking to you,
Oh,
right?
geez.
And he pulls a Trump that way, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
that is again, right? Like, so that could be very manipulative. Like,
Yeah.
unless you treat me the way that I want to be treated, and you treat this program the way that I think it should be treated, I'm not going to give you an interview, right?
Mm,
That is manipulative. So that's
100%.
yeah, and then right after that, you get bossy. You
Hmm.
you will see Leos in their worst. Now they may not always be bossy in public. Oh, but behind the scenes, they will be bossy,
Yeah.
right? Like Obama was like Mr. Chill, right? In public.
Right.
Could you imagine behind the scenes?
Oh, I mean, I can imagine. I can imagine. I wouldn't want to be behind the scenes, that's for sure, but I can imagine. Yeah.
Right. So they can be incredibly bossy. And it goes along. I mean, usually when they're bossy, it's when they're in that Wizard of Oz mode,
Mm, hmm.
right? They're the Grand Oz, the great Oz, and they've got all these pyrotechnics, and it's when they're really feeling a lot more like the little man behind the curtain or the little woman behind the curtain. Um, what else we have? Demanding. They can be very demanding if for whatever reason the world isn't catering to their needs. Hey, I'm a Leo. I demand you do this, right? I demand that we have ice cream tonight. You know, like they can go there. They feel justified in that in their demands. Now, occasionally, which is unfortunate, Leos at times can be cruel. And think of a king or a queen who feels as if they're not being respected enough,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? They can be outright cruel to people at times. And I'm trying to think of an example of a Leo who would uh, demonstrate an attribute around that. Okay. Uh, Maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but it's the one that comes to my mind. Sean Penn is a Leo, right? Okay.
I could
So
see that.
Sean Penn can be cruel, right? He can be freaking cruel. And I just think about this whole like weird thing with El Chapo and that
Uh-huh.
and that the Mexican telenovela gal, right? Like he doesn't give a shit about her, right? And she kind of gives a shit about him because he's an actor and she wants to break out of telenovelas. in Mexico. So she thinks that if she can have an affair with Sean Penn, right, that he'll get her into movies in America. And he's just really using her to get to El
Yeah.
Chapo because more than likely he's a spook, right? And some would say that that would be cruel,
Yeah.
right? Like he's just using her to get to what he wants or what he needs. I would say a cinematic version of that would be somebody like the character that John Malkovich plays in Dangerous Liaisons, right?
Okay. I haven't seen that one
Like
actually.
he winds up being cruel in that movie because he's trying to get something in that
Hmm.
film, something that's beyond his reach. It's a brilliant movie, by the way. Um, they can be Leos can be self-indulgent at times. Um, self-indulgent in the sense that maybe it's a food related issue, maybe it's a behavioral related issue. Uh, they just say, okay, it's all about me. It's all
Hmm.
about me, and I'm not getting enough me. Like Dion. Dion will use the word me. I need me some me, right? He'll actually say that, right? So there's a self-indulgent quality around, and the self-indulgence can manifest in many different ways, right? It could be self-indulgent that they need an audience. It could be like, oh, here's what I think, and you better sit
Hmm.
down and listen, and all of you better listen, right? Or it could be self-indulgent in terms of dietary needs or whatever, right? There's a self-indulgent quality when a Leo is not truly loving themselves in a
Hmm.
what I would say a positive fashion. Um, Here's another thing that I left this out of the attributes, and I think one of the things that Leos should practice is generosity,
Mm.
right? That they should be generous with their time, with their money, with their resources. Um, that's a very positive affirmation for Leos, right? To practice generosity. The shadow side is self-indulgence. And then you have false pride, which, true pride or positive pride is taking pride in the thing that you do. I did this
Hmm.
well, or I'm going to do this well. I'm not going to cut corners. I'm not going to be sloppy. I'm going to be very mindful, very conscious, and very aware of the thing that I'm doing. Right? Nothing wrong with that. The false pride is like doing something and expecting to get, kudos
Hmm.
or credit for it and it not really being all that good. Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, that's okay. Like, yeah, it's not bad. Like you didn't cure cancer, right? That is not the Mona Lisa. So, what do you
Yeah.
expect here, right? Like that's false pride, expecting
Yeah.
something because that's what they've gotten. Like when you are Leo rising and you get kudo, and you do something that's kind of mid and you
Yeah.
don't get the kudos, that's when the false pride kicks in.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Right?
I think that reminds me of Johnny Depp, kind of crushing the Jack Sparrow character early on, and then from what I've heard of accounts of him just kind of showing up, phoning it in, not even memorizing his lines in the later roles that he played that character, and just kind of expecting it to be a turnkey operation, but not really putting the time in to develop to earn that outcome, right? Um, so that reminds me of that.
And the Jack Sparrow character is very leonine.
Yeah,
He's very colorful, over the top, right? So yeah, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm just gonna dial it in or phone it in.
yeah,
I've got the character down. I don't have to, you know, invest any more time in developing who this Jack Sparrow guy is, right?
right.
Which, by the
You
way,
know,
he based it on Keith Richards.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I watched the original Pirates with the family not too long ago, and I mean that is one of the in terms of actors who were built for certain roles, I feel like that's got to be one of the all-time greats. Great performances for me. I haven't spent too much time meditating on that question, so maybe there's others that blow that one out of the water, but that one's near the top. One of the questions I had is, you think of obviously Leo, it's regal, it's kingly. Where do Leos fit on the hierarchy of like leadership? And obviously a lot of their characteristics can probably drive them into leadership positions. Do they turn out to be typically good leaders? Like, what's your analysis on that?
Well, so a long time ago, I did a show on Sunday Night AstroLogic called the Leo Code, and
Uh,
I looked at all these presidents within, say, the last 50 years, 60 years. We'll start with Kennedy.
mm-hmm,
They all have some attribute of Leo in their chart, which is worth taking note of, right? Like, for instance, George W. Bush was a Cancer, Sun in the 12th house. He's a Leo rising. Donald
mm,
Trump, Leo rising. Barack Obama, Leo. Um, Bill Clinton, Leo, right? And there's more even Harris, right? Harris, Mars and Leo. So
mm,
there's something I think on the Leo level where the answer to your question, I believe, is yes.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
They naturally gravitate towards positions of leadership. It does not always make them good leaders.
mm-hmm.
And I'll cite Barry Bonds as an example, right? Is he good? Was he a good leader? Nah, Barry Bonds wasn't a good leader. But that doesn't exclude Leos from being a good leader. Some people would say
Yeah,
Tom Brady was a good leader. I
yeah,
wouldn't really have a problem with that
yeah,
as his demonstrating leadership skills. So I think to your point, they naturally gravitate toward here. Barry Bonds is a great example of being a Leo,
mm-hmm,
right? He was Barry Bonds before he hit the juice was a really good player,
mm-hmm.
right? And he looked around and he saw Mark McGuire and he saw Jose Canseco and he saw Sammy Sosa
Yeah,
and Rafael Palmeiro, and he's like, "Man, these guys are juicing. If I'm going to be the best, I need to get the edge."
yeah,
Right. So being a Leo, he wanted to be the best. Right. So he aspired towards that role. Again, doesn't always mean that you're going to be a good leader. It just means
yeah,
that sometimes you're the best at what you do. Occasionally it can cross over and you can have somebody who is a Leo who can be a good leader. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to figure out. Let me just go here really quickly. Um, just do this. Trying to find a good example of that. I have somebody in mind, but I always, for whatever reason, I always forget their sun sign, and I should know this by now only because I've done it, dozens and dozens of times. Okay, yeah, that's not what I was thinking of. Yeah, so yeah, they can be good leaders, but again, like we'll use Brady for an example. Brady had to work his ass off to be good at what he did,
mm-hmm,
right? And so I think you look at somebody like Barry Bonds, who just had all this natural talent. His father was a baseball player, right? He grew up around the San Francisco Giants, and he's got this kind of very solar arc in his life. Does he have to work really hard to be good at what he does? Deion Sanders, crazy
yeah,
athletic ability.
yeah,
Does he have to work really hard at what he was able to do? I
yeah,
think people who are good leaders understand that you have to put in time and effort, and you have to show people that you got to where you were, not only by your talent and ability, but by maximizing what you were able to
Hmm.
do. And when you do that, then you have the ability to, I think, be a tremendous leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the best leaders too have a remarkable sense of empathy, right? Which can be maybe difficult for somebody who's got a self-centered, egotistical sort of disposition. So, the Leos who are able to kind of harness or master their shadow, characteristics, who can kind of step into that, like walking in somebody else's shoes kind of thing, could probably really emerge as a world class leader, theoretically. But yeah.
Well, I think for Leos, in order to do that, um, they have to, in some ways, have an experience of either the underclass or the working class.
Hmm.
So, I mean, let's just go through some Leos here real quick. I'll share the screen, and we can rank them in terms of leadership.
Hmm.
All right. So Napoleon's Leo.
Oh, yeah, I mean, one of the greatest leaders of all time.
So there you go. Um, Mussolini is a Leo. Obama's a Leo. Castro's a Leo. So, we tend to see like forms of tyranny. And
Yeah,
Mussolini's an interesting character,
yeah,
right? Like, he's Mussolini understands the power of the state.
yeah.
And we get the word fascism from Mussolini.
Yep.
So, could some
I,
people
I will say
attribute
this
tyranny
too,
to any of those four? I would say yes.
100%. Well, it's something fascinating to me about Fidel Castro. Obviously, not a fan of his like politics and the way he like comports himself as a world leader or whatever. But like the story of how he took Cuba
Yeah.
is, I mean, you have to have some pretty on point leadership and a sense of like I mean like it some brass stones, right, to do what he did. I mean they went on a boat with like 80 men from Mexico. Like they were met with gunfire. They scattered. They were all like kind of in the jungle, like broken up into pockets of like 10 and 12 men, like, and you're going to have some leadership skills to pull that one off, frankly, like, so,
That and a little help from the CIA always helps. But
so
yeah, you're right. I mean,
yeah,
to be able to galvanize a revolution,
yeah,
which is
exactly.
really what we're talking about. Schwarzenegger became governor. He's one of these Apollonian guys, right? Hoisted on the
Yeah,
shoulders, of Hollywood and the kingmakers. I wouldn't call him a leader though.
yeah,
Henry Ford is an interesting character. One of the stories about Henry Ford is that, he would go into the Ford plants and he would work with the engineers, because that's what he really loved. I mean, that was his background was. So I would say that would give him a quality of leadership
mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm,
people understood that he wasn't just some guy in a suit counting a bean.
yeah,
Like he wanted to know, like, how deep does that groove go? Where does that washer go? Right? Can we improve this function by, putting this flange here and removing this grommet there? Right? Like, so he demonstrated leadership, I think, on a horizontal level, but also kind of on
mm-hmm.
a vertical level as well.
Not to
Um,
mention, like, bringing people together and innovating the corporation and the organizational output modalities the way that he did. He's even if he had like other I don't know much about him. I haven't done a deep dive on Henry Ford, but like he's another one of those guys you have to, in my book, you'd have to say he's a great leader just because of what he was able to, bring a lot of people together to do, especially at a time where like you didn't have like computers and, all kinds of things to shortcut a lot of the issues. It was like manpower and, you had to like use your brain and your direction to organize that thing.
Yeah. And
So,
he wasn't really a silver spoon guy either, right?
yeah.
Like he had some juice, but he wasn't a silver spoon guy. And then, that world was incredibly competitive,
Hmm.
where you had Chrysler and Pontiac and Chevrolet and Daimler and all these other car companies, Studebaker. It was a very competitive atmosphere. So you literally had to be very hands on in that world in order to stay.
Hmm.
Ford's biggest challenge ultimately became incorporating the unions. So talk about Aquarius, right?
Mm.
Aquarius are unions. They're the group, they're the workers, they're radical. So, in fact, there are famous stories of Henry Ford and the union busting. Like he
Mm.
hired these guys that would like beat the fuck out of these union dudes because he knew what the unions were up to. Right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
wanted a piece of his company, and his wife threatened to leave him if he did not stop abusing the unions.
Wow.
So yeah, Bill Clinton leadership, I'd say no. But
Yeah, I
again,
agree.
there's a whole other story there about Clinton and his bloodline and stuff. J.K. Rowling, this is a really interesting kind of like stop along the way. J.K. Rowling has come out and said a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and this trans shit is not good for us.
Yeah.
And she kind of backpedaled initially, but she came forward again, and she's been very consistent with that. Right. So I think J.K. Rowling has demonstrated some leadership in that regard,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean,
Uh,
it's well, so I completely agree, and I think that's another. You just sparked an interesting thought where like leadership can look like Henry Ford developing an innovative, organizational tool, right? But it can also look like being willing to step into the firing line, and say and things that might be unpopular in your circles when there's like a potential price to pay for that, right? So that's a completely different form of leadership, but 100% leadership nonetheless. So yeah,
right. I mean, look at Aquarius. That's the group, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's the mob, and they wanted to cancel her,
yeah.
and she hung in there, and she hung in there long enough to accrue some allies along the way, which is very important in that
Hmm.
world. Marcus Garvey, well, he wanted to take people back to Liberia.
Yeah.
That's that's got
Yeah.
you got to have some leadership qualities there. Um,
Yeah.
Haile Selassie is a very interesting character, right?
Yeah.
Like Haile Selassie, like there's all this shit going on in Ethiopia,
Uh-huh.
right? There's like civil war, Ethiopia, Eritrea. Where does he go? He goes to England and he hangs out with British gentry and he studies with the British elite, right? They love Haile Selassie, right? And then eventually he's reinserted back into Ethiopia. What do they call him? They call him the Lion of Judah, right?
Uh-huh.
Because theoretically, Haile Selassie is supposedly descended from David. Like he has genealogical ties to David.
Huh.
Whether that's
Through Bathsheba or whatever.
yeah, whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And then out of Haile Selassie, we have Rastafarianism.
Yeah.
So he is the harbinger of a new religion, right? And even there's some interesting side notes around Rastafarianism and socialism too, which I don't want to get in the weeds with.
Hmm. Hmm.
But, he was a leader theoretically. Like all
Yeah.
those guys are saying, Ja Rastafari. Who are they referring to? They're referring to this guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Right. You got Tom Brady, aforementioned Roger Federer. There's Madonna, Neil Armstrong. There's your Barry Bonds, right? I don't think Barry Bonds is a leader. That's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bill the Butcher. Now that guy was a hell of a leader.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Kubrick. It's funny
Well,
that Kubrick and Hitchcock, they're both Leos, and they're both real oddballs. These
they got that
creative oddballs,
creativity and
creativity.
but and like, the thing about like, I mean, I think being a good director is inherently being a good leader because you're assembling so many different moving parts to, come together in a very particular, specific, intentional way. But these two are some of the masters. And I'll tell you, I mean, not super recently, but the Alfred Hitchcock's Presents series. Did you ever get? It was kind of
Yes,
like his answer to
I've
the.
seen some. Yeah, I've seen some of
Dude,
those.
those are fantastic. I mean,
Yeah,
it was like
yeah,
his kind of answer to the Twilight Zone type of
yeah,
thing. Not
yeah.
not super spooky or sci-fi, but like suspenseful, and they were awesome. Anyways, that's a side note. I love watching silver screen stuff
You know
from
what's
time to
interesting?
time.
You know what's interesting about Kubrick and Hitchcock is their geographical arcs, right? Kubrick is born in the United States and winds up living in England, and Hitchcock is born in England and winds up living in the
Hmm,
United States, right?
interesting.
Yeah. Jason Statham, I don't know if he's a leader or not, but he sure portrays
Yeah.
one in movies, right? Um, let's see, what else do we have here? Um, Herbert Hoover, no, I mean,
Yeah.
he's a president, but he's kind of the guy that sits on the turd of the depression,
Right. Right.
right?
Right. Exactly.
Who else?
T.E. Lawrence probably has got some leadership skills.
Well, he had to. I mean, he does
Yeah.
something that is like Malcolm, what's his name? Gladwell talks about him, right? And he talks about the strategy of going through the desert,
Uh,
right? And doing something that is completely unexpected. And to get those men to do that and to follow him through
hmm
the desert, that takes leadership skills.
Yeah, for sure.
100%. 100%. Who else do we have here?
David
Now,
Crockett.
Davy Crockett, he's got some leadership skills. Let's talk about Steve Wozniak.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Talk about generous. The US Festival, that's like his fucking party, right? That's his party. So
Yeah.
that's a Leo that's being generous, right? He's like
Yeah.
sharing his very large largesse with the world, and he's very different than Steve Jobs. He's not driven in the
Right.
same way that Jobs is a Pisces, right? So he's motivated by something very different than Wozniak. The aforementioned Mick Jagger, Boulevard, theoretical leader. Who else do you have? There's Monica Lewinsky, Lucille
There's
Ball.
Magic.
Yeah, Magic Johnson. We talked about Magic, Leo, right? Franz Joseph the First, Menelik the Second, Bugs Moran, the gangster. Any other leaders here? The guy that gave over Israel, Arthur
There
Balfour. Thank
you
you,
go.
Arthur. Um,
Leslie Groves. Now he was the Manhattan Project, or he was something to do with some.
did you fly one of the bombers?
Maybe, yeah. I forget exactly what role he played, but
He might have flown one of the bombers. He oversaw the construction of the Pentagon. There we go.
okay,
And
okay.
the Manhattan Project. All right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he worked with Oppenheimer, so he was like kind
Yeah.
of like the project manager, whereas Oppenheimer was like the brains.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see who else we have. Nestle. Um, who else do we have here? Anybody that Deng Xiaoping. Now that's an interesting case in leadership, right? Like he leads China out of Mao in the Cultural Revolution.
Uh-huh.
You know, he's the guy that eventually, like when Nixon goes to China, he meets with Mao, but he knew Deng Xiaoping, right?
Hmm.
And he knew that Deng would be the next guy, so he's having conversations with him about the direction of China and the U.S. The aforementioned De Niro, Gavrilo Princip, who's the guy who shoots Prince Ferdinand,
Yeah.
call that leadership per se.
Yeah, right.
Um, George Clinton and Parliament, right? No, he probably is with Parliament. I think he's English. No, he's an American. He's an American.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
Andy Warhol. You know, Andy Warhol's kind of a leader. You know, maybe not by his character,
Uh,
but by his artistic style.
yeah.
You know, creates pop art, op art. Um, let's see, who else do we have here? Milosevic, who was, of course, a leader of Serbia and Yugoslavia, and a uh, controversial one. Hulk Hogan, Leo. He seems like a Leo, doesn't he?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Very, very much so.
yeah.
Um,
So,
as this is a kind of a fun exercise. Have you ever heard of a guy named Samo Berja who he came up with the great founder theory? Not anything we need to like plunge too deep into now, but a few of the people that he identifies as like some of the greatest founders in history, like Muhammad, and it's like he has certain criteria that like how long does the thing that they found go on and grow on and beyond them. Napoleon was on that list, I think. And so, anyways, it's a really fascinating kind of lens to look at history and leadership through. So,
did you know that an immediate relative of Napoleon founded the FBI? Did you know that?
not surprising, but no, that I mean, it seems to be a very incestuous, kind of phenomenon that takes place with a lot of the elite circles and like the institutions, the alphabet agencies that run them and on or operate on their behalf, I should say.
So, Charles Joseph Bonaparte,
Wow,
he's a
wow.
descendant of the House of Bonaparte. His grandfather was Jerome Bonaparte, brother of Emperor Napoleon. So this guy
Wild.
became the U.S. Secretary of Navy, U.S. Attorney General, and he created the FBI. Like that dude got a lot done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you see, the Good Shepherd was a movie kind of about like the founding of the CIA. So not quite the FBI, but I feel like the Secretary of the Navy is a fast track to a lot of these types of the roles. I mean, I don't know what it is about that particular position, but a lot of those guys kind of go on to be spooks of one sort or another.
The director of The Good Shepherd is Robert De Niro. So
Hmm.
we're in Leo territory. It's actually a really great movie.
Yeah,
And yeah, the skull and bone stuff in that movie is pretty memorable and telling in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Um, all right, so you got a Leo baby to get back to,
yep,
and I think we rounded this corner, and plenty of Leo to take in
yep.
if you have a Leo child, or even just Leo in general. So any final words here, Ferris or
I mean,
Astro?
yeah. This is a
Astro.
fun episode, and I think based on some of the terrain we covered, Leo does probably strike me as the best sign. I think that's probably true. Um, and yeah, I'm a little bit sleep deprived, so pardon the maybe if anybody perceives a lack of energy on my part, but this was probably one of the more interesting and fun episodes that we've done so far, at least for me. So
I just think they just keep getting better. That's what I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're just rounding into form, and next month I get to speak from experience with Virgo,
All right.
even though I don't feel like I'm very much like a Virgo. I'm like the weirdest Virgo you'll ever meet. So join us next month again as we have another edition of Astro Dads, and we'll see you then. Bye for now.